Okay, all right. We are now live. We are live on Connie Reguli's YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook Family Forward Project. So I know I had posted an event up. I have a lot of people who just kind of check in and get notified when something comes up on Family Forward Project. So I hope we have a few people join, but if not, we will have this. It will circulate and just continue to have a conversation. So I am Connie Reguli. I am here. I practiced law for 28 years in the field of family law, juvenile law, criminal law, working with people all over the country. I'm not going to get into my story today because it would involve really kind of getting into the details of the retaliation, and that's not what we're here to talk about. So what I have done over the past couple of years is really focus on the legal aspects in the community of dealing, protecting children and parental rights and protecting children from this very, very fast paced, ever evolving trans deception and the way it's affecting parents legally in DCS and foster care. And I have had the opportunity to get to know John in South Carolina, and he is really the mental health professional in this area. And so, John, just introduce yourself a little bit.
Connie, it's a pleasure to be with you on your platform, and you do have quite the story. You've put yourself out there. So, um, I've been doing therapy for about 30 years now, and have three primary areas or populations that I've worked with over the years. One is sexual abuse survivors, so I understand the impact of severe sexual abuse that has to do with dissociative disorders ultimately. So those that have been shattered in mind and body, so to speak, or mind and soul, how to help someone move forward with that, how to help them heal. I also spent many years working with kids in the system. So the exact vulnerable population that we're talking about that are being targeted, I also had my own 12-bed adolescent female group home. Step up or step down from psych hospitals. So I understand that very well. Worked in group homes, residential treatment, the largest facility west of the Mississippi at that time. Then spent 11 years, I was recruited to start what amounts to the nation's first intensive treatment program for men in long-term solitary confinement, incarcerated men. Through that, I accrued more clinical contact hours than any other psychology staff member in prison than anyone else in the US or Canada. So the Hannibal Lecters and others, those were my guys. Also ran a 65-bed forensic specialized unit for the Department of Corrections, ran that for a year for sexually violent predators. Have done low and high intensity treatment, done hundreds and hundreds of risk assessments, specialized parole evaluations. I currently am a certified clinical sex offender treatment provider. I'm also a certified trauma specialist, but I'm one of South Carolina's largest sex offender treatment providers. I do regular kind of counseling by day, but for those that have significant sexual trauma, that tends to be the bulk of my clientele. So by day, I'm working with survivors. By night, so to speak, with the 5 groups during the week and on the weekend, work with sexual predators. And I've got a couple of my own platforms as far as websites. I run survivorsupport.net. That's for supporting survivors and those that would like to better understand how better to support them. I have churchprotect.org. That is a training site because the most sophisticated of predators will target churches, and most churches are unaware of that. I can speak to that because I was originally heading into vocational ministry, so I understand that. The other site is unmaskingthetransmovement.com, and have a YouTube site or channel of exactly that same title. I have my own YouTube. And then I do a regular counseling program that's nice on Friday nights, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we deal with some of the key, just normal counseling topics. And I'm in the midst of a series, not just on boundaries, but also forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. So, and I have a blog as well, survivorsupport.us.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, wow. Well, certainly between how I have really dealt with this in the legal world and how you
Sure.
have dealt with this in the mental health world. And I will say that many attorneys, and for years, there's really sort of this idea and this philosophy that the twain shall never meet, right? The mental health people and the lawyers, right?
Right, here
Like,
we are.
yeah, right.
Right.
So, and we've tried to, in part because most attorneys don't understand psychology or mental health at all. I have a little bit of advantage in that I did my master's program in psychology. Makes me just know enough, just enough to be dangerous. So I try not to step on any boundaries there, but I at least understand this intertwining. And I also say attorneys are very, very dangerous when they are in a place to deal with anything related to mental health because they have no clue, right? They don't even know how to they don't know what to do with it. And judges surely do not know what to do with it, okay, which is one of the reasons I'm crying out to get the community, the legal community and the mental health community to start to sort of join this dialogue, to get this dialogue going, because with what we're going, where we are going in law, in the legal world, related to LGBTQ, and you and I have talked about this with the new laws that are being passed, it is squarely putting this issue in the courtroom. Okay. We've
That's right.
had it, we've had it in the criminal aspect, of course, in the courtroom, but now it's much more sinister. Do you agree?
100%, Connie, and it needs to be dealt with. People need to understand really what this is all about. I mean, you have a number of different people that are involved in this for different reasons, and I am very concerned. And see, so much so that I have a website, Unmasking the Trans Movement.
Mhm.
So parents need to understand this is not going away unless we make it go away. But there needs to be legislation. But now the question is, what kind of legislation? Ultimately, we need to protect kids and families, but do so in the right way.
Well, I also consider myself a bit of a historian when it comes to laws and families over the past 200 years. And I say there is hope because remember, we used to slice people's brains in halves, right? We used to do lobotomies. We did stop doing lobotomies. So hopefully, if we can do this faster, we did lobotomies for 70 years. So hopefully because of platforms and because of social medias and because we can educate people and have these conversations instead of these things just slipping through the cracks and the dark shadows of night, maybe we can accelerate the corrective path. That's what I hope, and that's why I hope to have these conversations. So I want to talk a little bit, let's just get right into the two states that have taken some very serious laws and put them in place, which is Washington, the state of Washington, and the state of Hawaii. And we've looked at those. The one, and I have right in front of me here, Washington mandates LGBTQ curriculum in K through 12 schools. And then we had previously shared the law that passed in Hawaii. It just takes my breath away. I hardly know what to do with it.
Well,
So
it's a child trafficking law.
yeah, yeah. So
That's all this is.
yeah, so tell me, so I'm going to say from a legal aspect, this is a little bit about what I see, and then I want you to just jump right in there and talk about from the perversion, the sexual perversion aspect of what you see happening here. So from a legal perspective, we are taking away a parent's right to know what is being discussed in school and from protecting their children from uh, narratives being pushed in school that are contrary to what their beliefs are, whether they are religious beliefs or whether they are just conservative value beliefs generally about male and female, and wanting to protect their child from being inundated with misinformation, basically. So, from a legal perspective, I am terrified for parental rights. And and I've also seen it. I've seen that there are now cases, there's Texas, particularly, and Montana, where there have been custody cases on this issue, where a case in Texas, a father did not want his child transitioned to a female, and this was a young child, like 8 or 9 years old. And he was actually denied all rights of custody of the child because the mother agreed to the gender transition. In the state of Montana, this father and stepmother found out that a young teen was being transitioned through school, and they disagreed with it and they fought it. And the judge took custody away from them and sent the child to Canada to her biological mother, who had already had problems at being a mother, and cut off her United States parents. And now they're completely, they have no idea what's going on, and they don't
Yeah.
even know what the laws are in Canada, which, knowing that
They're
Canada,
bad. They're
yeah,
bad.
it's even more liberal, it's going to be very
Yeah.
dangerous. So I see that from a legal perspective. And so talk to people about the danger that you see from a mental health perspective and from the sexual perversion.
There we go. And Connie, again, thank you for the work that you do. People need to understand you've put your money where your mouth is. You've put yourself on the line defending kids. The best way for parents to understand what the trans movement, or what I call the trans deception, is all about is to understand that there's been brainwashing. There's no other way to put it. We're going to call it, I call it unduly influencing, but this entire narrative, the fact that we're talking about any of this, has come about through a man-made effort. This is man-made. 20 years ago, this didn't exist. Prior to the year 2005, and everybody really needs to let this sink in, because I'm going to sound like is it Aesop's fable? The emperor's new clothes.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm that little kid saying, hey, as the king is parading through the town, because the tailor because the tailor was such a grand schemer, that the tailor of the king convinced the king that the king was now wearing special clothing that bright individuals could see, and he is now decked out in what amounts to gold. But meanwhile, the tailor played a little trick on the king, and the king was naked. So you had this incredible con job played upon the king. And of course, everyone went along with it. And I think the crux of the story is the king decides to parade his new outfit, his new suit, down the main boulevard. And the crowds gather on both sides, and everyone's applauding the new suit, which happened to be the birthday suit of the king. But everybody's strutting. The king doesn't know he's literally strutting his stuff. But there was a young boy that hadn't been so influenced by the social contagion and by all the scripts, hadn't been online on social media. And this little kid looks out, and he's out from the crowd comes this little voice, Mommy, why is the king naked? And the spell started to wear off. That is the trans deception. So I can tell people definitively, because I've been doing this for 30 years, meaning think of the populations that I've worked with, survivors of sexual abuse, the most severe cases of kids that are going to be put in group homes, or the highest level of care, which would be residential treatment. Kids are sent away. There's an on-ground school. They never get off that compound or the grounds. Okay. And then I've worked with sexual predators for 15 years. And I can assure people that prior to the year 2005, there was no such thing as trans. This has been 20 years of brainwashing. And so without pornography and its influence, and those that have been pushing pornography. And what do sexual predators use to groom kids? Sexualized things. You have to begin to dumb down a child's intuition and normalize that which shouldn't be normalized prior to puberty. And you're going to begin to override or cross boundaries and inhibitions. You have to disinhibit a child, or if you're a predator, you run the risk of going to prison. I mean, you run an ever increasing risk. Meaning, a predator has one of two ways to get at a kid, to molest or rape a child. You either hold a gun to the child, you're the snatch and grab kind of rapist, but quite frankly, that's very few.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of pedophiles are very sophisticated. And what do I mean by that? By the time a perpetrator is arrested, watch how people respond. And you'll get a sense as to whether or not he was an impulsive rapist, kind of the creepy guy down the street. The news crew goes out to the guy's house and then they're interviewing the neighbors, and the neighbors will say, yeah, it doesn't surprise us. The news reporter always asks, does it surprise you? The guy next door, he's arrested now, has 25,000 images, or, it has so many victims, bodies in the backyard. And so you'll have one of two, by the time it gets that extreme, you'll have one of two responses by neighbors or people that know him, such as church members. And they'll say, no, we always knew there was something creepy about the guy, but like church members or others, they'll say, well, no, I still can't believe,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe it, right? And so you'll tend to have one of two responses, and that will give you an indication of the degree of sophistication of the predator. The most sophisticated of predators will specifically target those industries or those jobs, those positions, those careers that are mandated reporters, or that place them in a position of being a mandated reporter. That means regular and consistent access to kids in some fashion in a position of authority, trust, or responsibility. So here's a random list of mandated reporters: teachers, therapists, any mental health professional, police officers, doctors, coaches. So anybody in youth athletics, scoutmasters. If anybody's familiar with what's happened with the U.S. Boy Scouts, I think it's 83,000 victims.
Wow. Wow.
83,000. And the question is this: how did that happen?
Yeah.
Right? People missed the red flags. Why? Because predators are that good. The most sophisticated know how to fake it. Why? Because they are sexual psychopaths. Let me define that. There's two kinds of psychopaths. I'm also trained in the hair psychopathy checklist. The Department of Corrections flew out Dr. Robert Hare. There were a handful of us that were selected for that training. I was one of those. So I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. That means I can do forensic assessments of psychopathy. The PCLR, or hair psychopathy checklist, is gold standard of forensic assessments for psychopaths. I know them like the back of my hand. Okay. So the most sophisticated of sexual predators are psychopaths. Well, I should say, to be perping on a kid, you're already morphing into a psychopath. A psychopath is a predator. They are different now by nature. What do I mean by that? Everything about them, including their brains, how their brains operate, are changing. Once somebody ends up with a psychopathic brain, it's not coming back. Now, the question is it nature, nurture? Is it genetics? Is it cognitive, the structures within the brain? It's all those a little bit. It changes the brain permanently, but the question is, how does someone become that way? My contention is this, having worked with thousands of them, is it is by choice over time as you're overriding conscience, and you fast track it through pornography. 100% of every sex offender, probably since the 80s, probably the 70s, quite frankly, if you listen to what Ted Bundy says, there's a pretty authoritative person as far as firsthand account, because everybody interviews pedophiles firsthand account, and supposedly we're supposed to take that at face value. Why wouldn't we take Ted Bundy's account at face value then? Okay. but certainly ever since the 80s, the process of deviance, and that's the issue. A man offends because he's deviant. What does deviant mean? Where a normal man, and I'll stick with the male population, where a normal man can only get an erection to the extent that he knows that his partner or spouse is enjoying herself, right? And that's why mood matters, right? She can ruin the mood. I'm not placing a responsibility, right? But if the couple is together and just about the moment of climax, the wife says, "Oh, I really need to look at those cobwebs."
Right.
Right? What's going to happen? I'll tell you what, every single guy knows. Well, there goes that. Okay. That's a normal guy. That's why the highest paid prostitutes know how to fake it. Deviance is the opposite, and it happens over time. So where a normal man needs to know that his partner is along with him, that she's enjoying herself, a deviant man can only get an erection to the extent that he knows that he is traumatizing and creating duress in his
Wow.
victim.
Wow.
We're talking predator. If she were to suddenly say, "I love you, let's get married," he would lose his erection.
What about with children, though? Because I mean, they groom children into these situations, and they're not necessarily terrorizing them. So let's take that back to kids, because this is where, with these new laws and this curriculum, and I want to, we've
But
got to look at where we going with these kids, and
there we go.
what are these predators doing with children?
So every pedophile, first, it's important for people to know that 100% of sex offenders were deeply steeped in progressively twisted pornography prior to offending. You'll never find an exception. How can I speak to that? 11 years on the psychology staff, Pennsylvania Department of Correction, I had access to all criminal histories, criminal files, criminal records. 100% of pedophiles, without exception, when they are arrested, they're arrested with 100% of them with child rape pornography. About 98% include the dissemination or distribution of that same material. So it's inevitably you're going to find that anybody that's arrested for child rape pornography is also spreading it around. It just
So it's not just, I mean, and this is such a dark topic. I'm just gonna pray over us here to, have some cleansing. But child pornography, what is that? I mean, I don't want to get us banned from any type of social media platform. So, but what you're saying, what I hear you saying, it is not just pictures of a child without clothes on. It's actually photographs, images, videos of violence against children.
absolutely, including inserting things into the child in every orifice.
Wow.
Because a psychopath, and this will transition into then, like, people are probably saying, "John, I don't want to." Well, you know what? You need to understand this, because I'll tell you what, this is behind the trans deception, and I'll connect all the dots. I will connect the dots, and hopefully this, if we still have listeners listening or viewers, right? This is what's going to energize you, because you have to understand pedophiles have created for themselves the perfect avenue to access kids, and I'll prove it. So if people are not as energized as I am, it's either because they don't understand, which I totally understand.
Yeah, and now these laws in these states that are mandating LGBTQ curriculum, which God knows whatever that is. I don't even know what it is. I mean,
I'll
what
tell you what
are
it is.
they?
I'll tell
Okay,
you what
please
it is.
tell me. Please
It's
tell
actually
me.
grooming material. If any of the men currently in my 5 sex offender treatment groups, I am one of the largest providers of sex offender treatment in the community-based treatment in South Carolina. Let me repeat it. I'm one of the largest. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. Okay. So as someone who currently works with sex offenders, tomorrow I've got my 3 groups. I've already done 2 this week. Okay. I want people to understand that no man is attracted to minors. Zero denata. It is a lie. They started with adult porn even as a teenager. And there's a progression. So by the time a man is interested in accessing a child, he's already deviant, and therefore he is psychopathic. How can I say that? In the state of Pennsylvania, it's mandated prior to a sexually violent predator getting out of prison, and that is a designation by a judge that is laid on top of an inmate. So an SVP, there's a secondary required assessment for all sexually violent predators in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm going to assume then in probably a number of other states. Okay. There's a board called the Sex Offender Assessment Board, the SOAB board. I was actually approached to be a part of doing assessments for them. So we're doing sex offender treatment for men in prison for sexual violent predators. Let's say they graduate and now they're going to be eligible for parole. The SOAB board will come in, an assessor will come in and do a secondary evaluation. They have a standardized approach, a canned approach, meaning every time they meet with one of these guys, they're going to do an interview. But guess what assessment instrument 100% of the time they use with a sexually violent predator with a pedophile?
What is that?
The hair psychopathy checklist.
Oh.
So they're always assessing for degrees of psychopathy. So I can tell you, anybody that's harmed a child, anybody that's quote unquote interested in a child is morphing into a psychopath, and a psychopath it's synonymous with deviance. So you have a man that's no longer normal, he's a predator. And if any of the men in my sex offender treatment groups were found in possession of the books that are given to kids currently in elementary school for the trans sex ed, those men would be failed out of my groups and sent back to prison because it's the exact material used to groom kids.
Oh.
So we are now codifying the process by which sexual grooming material is put into the hands of kids. And the only reason nobody's being arrested is the perps are smart enough to know they can't put photographs. So what do? They draw in details the exact photographs that they'd be arrested for the distribution of child pornography and for child exploitation. So every single book in school for this sexually deviant trans sex ed, 100% of it, what you're going to find are drawings that are detailed, but cartoonish. Why? Because if you take one of those drawings and actually put a photograph in there, what's the difference? You're seeing a young kid give another kid oral sex. They draw it. Well, why not just put a photograph? Because if you put a photograph, now you got child pornography. So they found a loophole to get grooming material into schools so that kids are exposed to what? Concepts, ideas.
And
so
since
kids are being groomed in schools right now. If I'm a sexual predator, the trans movement is my favorite, is really the consummation of everything I could hope for, because ultimately behind the scenes, what's happening as well, this is laying the groundwork for the decriminalization. It starts with this, the destigmatization, the normalization, the protection of via civil rights protection, adding the P to the LGBT, P for pedophilia, because they know they can't do a frontal assault to get pedophilia legalized. So they're going to decriminalize it by virtue of civil rights protection. If you can give somebody civil rights protection, they're not going to be sentenced. So behind the scenes, what this is doing is it's normalizing sexual deviance. And it's dumbing down people to understand what is a sexual predator. Sexual predators, the vast majority of them, are not the snatch and grab freakish guy. The more deviant a man becomes, the more sexually deviant a man becomes, people need to understand this. He either will become more impulsive, and I have a chart, as a matter of fact, on my YouTube channel, I just published a part 3 of a current series I'm doing on assessing sexual deviance. So they can go on there and see what I'm working through. I'm developing a chart. People need to understand that the vast majority of sexual predators, so sexual deviants and predators are the same, it's synonymous. So the majority of sexual predators, especially the sophisticated ones, end up looking more normal the more deviant they become. That's why they get elected and put into office and they create Epstein Island.
Yeah,
And what
wow.
else do? They end up becoming Secretary of Education of Ontario, Canada, Benjamin Levine, who was a heinous child predator who benefited from the policies he was pushing to lessen the criminal sanctions. So he benefited not only by pushing the Soji sex ed material, he was the guy, Soji 123. He did it. He was a pedophile, and he got it once he was busted. None of his academic friends, by the way, distanced themselves from him.
Well,
So,
yeah. And so as we put this in the schools, I mean, I'm just visualizing next step is a deviant teacher actually right there in the classroom who
100%.
is teaching this could move to touching, right? I
100,
mean,
well, because especially if you have to have a girl with a little packer, that's that's a fake little penis that's put in her pants. Well,
mhm,
with the bathroom policies, guess what? Now somebody may need to help her adjust herself because we want to make sure it fits right. So this teacher that could self-identify. So if I'm a perpetrator, I can self-identify. Now I'm going to emblazon my room and myself with rainbow colors.
mhm.
What is that? Those are flags for other pedophiles to know this is a very user-friendly facility, um, school, or a community. Really, I'll tell you how predators view these, because these are all testing the resolve and testing the insights, testing the wisdom, as it were, but testing the boundaries of community leaders. The more I can push the envelope, I know they're suckers. So the greatest way is drag queen story hour number one. If you're gonna swallow that, so to speak, you're gonna do anything. You're just absolutely brain dead.
Right,
Right. And
right,
so
r
therefore I know that all the leadership at the governmental level is user friendly. And so now it's just easy hunting. And so
right,
now I know the schools within those communities, within those provinces, within the local counties, they're easy pickings. So if I
right.
start with the libraries or get on school board, those that are pro LGBTQ, then what you're going to find is I can get the deviant materials into schools, and then I can go on staff, and staff will cover me. And if there's an incident, they'll deal with it in house. So
Well,
we
and
wonder about the
mhm.
Catholic Church. This is being magnified all over now in schools.
Yeah. And when you talk about community leaders, I will remind people that also includes lawmakers, right? That is that is
100%.
that is the lawmakers and and this dichotomy. I think now, of course, trans is so in our face. We have two very distinct mindsets. We have the mindsets of the hell no, and then we have this mindset of what's so bad about it, right? It's these are, this is a people's feelings. They've got to express those feelings. And I'm finding that these very liberal accepting lawmakers are putting laws in place like the Washington law and the Hawaii law that's permitting, actually in your face, permitting and mandating this type of curriculum. And the conservatives are not doing are not taking a counterattack. They are putting in, I discussed with you before about, parental rights legislation, and they can't get a law passed that says we are banning LGBTQ curriculum in our schools, but we're going to sort of sideways say, well, maybe if a parent objects and they should have consent, then maybe it shouldn't happen. But we're not getting that aggressive fight against it from conservative lawmakers.
You're going to have to be conservative. I'm aggressive. The pastors better get on board. They better figure this out real fast. Let me give you the other half of the concern. So I have two concerns about the trans deception. Therefore, everything we're talking about falls under this. The trans movement is the world's greatest ruse, scam, and scheme ever devised against vulnerable kids and their families. Now, how can I prove that? prior to the year 2005, this was unheard of. If someone is trying to make the case and the case is made, well, that's because it was all suppressed. Nobody was willing to accept it. And it finally came out once. Now it was like an infection underground. Now it finally came to the surface, like withdrawing salve. Now the thorn came out. Now we're dealing with real. Now we're finally getting real. Okay, real with what? Non-binary. Okay, so we're getting real about the fact that there's a fictitious concept that erases XX and XY chromosomes. So we used to all use the phrase, it's as basic as biology 101. So we're now reality-based by having erased biology 101. Do you understand that as cult speak? So we're letting who define things? We're letting who capture the narrative? What you have with the trans deception is this. Prior to the year 2005, this never existed. John, how can you say it? I've been in the field since 1992 and worked with the exact population that are being targeted, especially by the Trevor Project, which, if anybody is familiar with Sam Brinton, he was the deviant guy for the Biden administration, the Undersecretary of Energy, dealing with spent nuclear waste. Now we should really be concerned, talk about bribing, or in a position to be compromised. Okay, he's the guy that finally, after 3 airport stealing incidents of luggage, and the question is this, other than the brazenness of the guy to wear the fashion designer from Africa, wear all her outfits, and he took the suitcase, right, to go teach a BDSM kink seminar. Okay, now get this. He's using a stolen suitcase with stolen females' luggage to go teach a seminar on kink, which is male deviance because it's implementing pain. So again, only a deviant male gets off on kink, and therefore he's already predatory. So we have a predatory man who is a sexual criminal. How can I say that? He is a criminal and he's a sexual deviant. John, how can you call him a sexual criminal? He wasn't charged. Where's the women's underwear? Well, what does that have any? Okay, we got a bright guy. He went to MIT. He was in charge of the spent waste fuel. So bright guy. And he says, we just can't remember what he did with the underwear. I'll tell you exactly what he did with the women's underwear based upon my 15 years. People need to understand this. He didn't steal the clothes for the clothing. He stole the clothes for the underwear and he masturbated in, and he got rid of the evidence. That's why bright guy acts brain dead, says, well, I don't remember what I did with it. Okay, people need to understand, including in Canada, right? There was an army colonel who ended up being a serial rapist murderer. By the time men are wearing women's underwear, you think they've purchased that underwear, don't you? Mm. How do you know? Well, how do you know? Well, just because you won't fathom it, but I'll tell you where he got the underwear. It's the thrill of the hunt. He's stealing the underwear. Why? Have you ever heard of BTK killer, Dennis Rader, trophies? People need to understand, by the time a guy is brazen enough to wear women's underwear and then out in public under the drag, and by the way, how do you know he has even underwear on as he's working with the kids?
Right.
You think because he's nice. Look at Jen Specht. Phil Illey in the blue dress comes, and I raised huge concerns. Like, you've got to be kidding me. A guy is targeting vulnerable population, and you think it's nouveau to be open a big tent to a guy who's a sexual deviant who's talking about being an AGP, which is a silly term anyways. It's sexual deviance.
Right.
This is a public safety issue. Planet Fitness right now is defending their policy to have sexually deviant men, cross-dressing men. All they have to do is say they self-ID and they go right into women's locker room. This is a public safety issue. Now, to bring it back to this issue, you need to understand the kind of guys that are going to be interested in dressing this way, who are going to be the ones to come in and give these presentation on sexual deviant sex ed, including doing some of the school, the school activities where the drag queens come in. Okay, what kind of guy is doing that? The sexual deviant guy that is grooming the kids. It's all sexual grooming now has been reframed in terms of gender affirmation and the concern. So that's on the one end. Now let's talk about the kids. My concern is this, that all the red flags of sexual predation. Think about a sexual, think about a mandated reporter. I referenced that at the beginning. Teachers, anybody that has access to kids, anybody that deals with kids are mandated reporters. At least here in the US, every other year, if you're a mandated reporter, you have to go get recertified through the sex abuse awareness course. Okay, so that you are up on being able to identify as a mandated reporter, because you are mandated to report. You don't have to investigate. You have to report. What do you have to report? You don't have to prove it, but suspicion. Okay. Every mandated reporter is mandated by law to report suspected abuse. Okay. We can see bruises, so we have to report that. It's also elder abuse, other things, but child abuse, there are a couple different categories. So everybody within the sound of my voice, if you're a mandated reporter, you know, right? Because you can't get licensed or certified without taking the child abuse, and also pastors and those that teach Sunday school are mandated reporters. So a lot of people within the sound of my voice are mandated reporters. So the question is this: can you identify physical abuse within a kid? Pretty easy. Can you identify neglect? It has to do with malnutrition and other things. Probably the kid comes, he's unkempt. Can you identify sexual abuse? You're a mandated reporter. Tell me the 10 most readily identifiable key red flag indicators of sexual abuse since you're a mandated reporter. Tell me now. You should be able to rattle them off like this.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
you will tell me now is silence, and you have just, for the vast majority of mandated reporters, if you believe the trans movement and the deception, you now will reframe those 10 key clinical indicators in gender-related issues, and you will normalize it. Now you're dumbed down because you have a kid in front of you, more than likely the vast majority of who are being groomed or perped on. And the number one clinical indicator, and this is more the practical end of things. Let's take a girl. She's being actively perped on by an uncle, and she will come to you as a teacher or as a therapist. Do you think she's going to come out with it and say, Uncle Charlie is feeling me up and putting things in my anus and putting things, his fingers? Do you think she's really going to come out with that? Zero.
No.
What is she going to say? First of all, there are going to be indicators, maybe starting to dress differently, maybe acting depressed or anxious, maybe mood
Yeah, but they're
changes.
very fine, aren't they? I mean, I've from a legal perspective, I've dealt with several situations, and I mean, I've been in situations with children who are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Maybe by 12 and 13, if they get assaulted, they can say it or they can tell somebody. But when you have children younger than that, and that's why again, the school curriculum of kids don't even know what sex is at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old unless something is being told to them. And if it's being presented to them in such a way that they have these figure drawings. And the other thing is, I have seen on YouTube, they have anime that is very sexual,
There
which
it
is
is.
those Japanese.
It's so common. Anime and hentai. That's that
Yep.
Japanese style. I've got guys in my sex offender treatment right now, right? Because again, the perps know that if they're busted with actual photographs, it's child pornography, but they can look at the most deviant and heinous of stuff that these guys will draw that's very detailed, and they can't be
Exactly.
prosecuted for it. So
Exactly. And it's
all of
not
that material
banned.
is in these books.
Well, and it's not banned as
No,
pornography on YouTube.
it's
And the other
protected
thing,
speech.
some very sick people are actually taking cartoons that children watch, such as, even Frozen and some Disney, and they're taking sections of it and clips from it, or with AI regenerating it and putting sexual acts actually within those cartoons, where the child thinks they're clicking on the next cartoon of Elsa, and then it goes right into that. It extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. I mean, and I'm flip back to law. I'm like, do we need a law that criminalizes images of pornography and sexual deviance that are not real photographs. And
Yeah, and
especially now
100%
with
will be. That's right.
AI.
That's right,
Yeah.
AI generated. Kind of here's to help kind of connect this with what's going on in the schools. So let's say I'm that teacher, because two primary people that a kid will disclose to, but again, a kid's not going to come out and disclose. Rare is, 1 in a million that a
Hmm.
kid walks up and say,
Right.
"Hey, I'm being touched at home." It's
Right.
not going to happen. So if we care about protecting kids, we're going to have to become a little bit mindful and conceptual. That's why the training is there. So any mandated reporter should be able to list for me right now, what are the 10 red flag clinical indicators? Okay. The number one thing, you're inevitably going to hear this and see this. And so let the weight of this sink in. If you're a teacher or a therapist, here's what you're more than likely going to hear if a girl is being perped on. Ready? I hate being a girl. I wish I was a boy.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Now,
Wow.
if you're in a province, if you're in a county, if you're in a state that has said that the therapist cannot ask a follow up question because that might be that might be quote unquote anti conversion therapy, at that moment, the kid has said the magic word. And therefore, what is a therapist supposed to do? We're going to fast track off to gender services, meaning what? We're going to have them sit in front of a therapist who's a gender therapist. There's no such thing, by the way, who has a mindset, who has a bent, who has an agenda to get a kid on wrong sex, cross sex hormones. Now we're going to sterilize the kid. And the trans deception is this. Parents need to understand this. So it starts with what? The gateway. What's the gateway? Gateway porn. In this case, it's gateway drawings. We then, at the same time, we're dumbing down a child's inhibitions, which means all the more, the longer a kid is exposed to the content, the less he or she is able to discern that they're being perped upon, crossing boundaries, because the perps would use this exact kind of material to sit down with the kid and say, oh, love is love. And, age knows no boundaries. And you're a very mature child, and I have a young spirit, and we have two spirits. And I think we're starting to find that we really care about each other. Okay. So we have the sexual predation going on. And now a child's sexuality is becoming confused. And virtually all of those kids that end up being fast tracked, dumped out onto a surgeon's gurney have these things in common. They've been sexually perpetrated or violated, so their boundaries have been all screwed up. They are autistic, so they have a difficult time with their intuition. What is intuition? The reality testing mechanism for what? Boundaries and discerning reality, what is or isn't true. So all you need to do with that kid is say there's not two genders and not two sexes, not X, 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 Y. And now a kid will believe it. They're much more concrete. The other characteristics of the kids that are being fast tracked, eventually dumped out onto a surgeon's gurney, because what is the trans movement? It is a moving sidewalk. You get the kid on the on-ramp at any point in time. And what are the stages? Well, you're going to influence them. Influence in two ways. You're going to normalize, you're going to decrease the differences between boy and girl, male and female. So you're going to introduce mythology. So they can't reality test. And so then they start to become accustomed to it. And then we've got the social transitioning. Along with that, you have the introduction of sexual deviance, meaning sexually deviant material. The kid doesn't know it. He's being exposed to adult content long before puberty. So then now the kid is eventually going to do what? We're going to begin to use phrases such as non-binary, and then we're going to begin to introduce the idea of names.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because if we give them a new name, then the other name, the other part of them is quote unquote a dead name. Why is it that within the trans movement, when you go online, inevitably, whether Facebook, Twitter, these other Reddit, whatever, you're going to have these subgroups about DID, dissociative identity disorder. Where did that come from? Well, that came from one of two things, one of a couple of places. But what is DID? It is always the result of profound sexual abuse. That we used to call it multiple personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
When a child is being perped on profoundly, so you can have, and grooming will always increase. And the smarter a perp is, there'll be about 6 different approaches he will take eventually to achieve perpetrating on the child for over an extended period of time, then ensuring and eventually securing silence.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
child being perped on and eventually becoming silent. The smarter the perp is, you're going to play mind games like a cult leader. Well, that means a child can't figure out who's perping, is perpetration even taking place, but their feelings will tell them they're being violated in pretty profound ways. So, where does that anger, the flip side of hurt is anger, where does that anger go? They turn it inward toward self harm. And if the more profound the abuse, the splitting that on some level within the child early on, a child says, "This isn't happening to me. I'm out of here." So,
Hmm.
with a profound sexual abuse case, you'll inevitably have dissociation and self harm. Why is it within the trans movement, with the more profound cases of the kids that eventually go on to get their breasts sliced off, or boys that are castrated that get into what? Sissy porn.
Hmm.
Why is it that inevitably you will have DID, or dissociative identity disorder, talked about? And when a surgeon inevitably works on one of these kids, they will be slicing through pre-existing scars from self-injurious behavior. And is it possible that you have a part of a child, let's say she's a girl by nature, and now is there a male part? Always. Why? Because the girl needs to feel protected. So a part of her looks down and says, what are these doing on my body? Because these were the source of what? They
Hmm.
started it all. This is the problem. If I get rid of these, I won't be assaulted anymore. And so that part of the child takes over. That part of now the teen takes over and says, I don't want to be a girl. I wish I was a boy. Now a boy part comes out, and the boy says, I want these removed. And what happens at age 16, 17, 18, 19, 20? And all of a sudden, after the aftermath of this and the buyer's the thrill of it, supposedly, buyer's remorse, and let's say that other part of them comes out and looks, and now their breasts are gone. They've added insult to injury. The suicide rate after the medicalization dramatically increases. So these surgeons who are mandated reporters, so they're mandated reporters, they are willfully ignoring the mental health indicators, the clear red flags. So the trans movement is the perfect means by which kids can be groomed and then fast tracked into, while they're being perped on. So it attracts and it covers for perpetrators. Also, that's why you're seeing what are called furries involved, because furries are big mascot-like suits that cover 100% of identities. And I learned about that through some of the more sophisticated and heinous pedophiles in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections doing time, and they were in sex offender treatment. So the trans movement is the greatest Trojan horse and the greatest gift to sexual predators. And it's creating in kids the greatest mental health crisis, and it's taking wounded kids and typically sexual abuse survivors, kids. Either way, you're overriding kids' boundaries, you're introducing sexualized content that benefits the perpetrators. Now you're confusing them, and eventually, what are you going to do? You're putting them on a moving sidewalk. The trans movement is progressive. You're eventually going to get into the medicalization. So now you're sterilizing kids. That is a eugenics dream come true.
Right.
There goes the
Right.
family tree of that child. And
Right.
then it's eventually going to dump them out on a surgeon's gurney, making the surgeon potentially 70,000 in a couple of hours. So that, just like Dr. Evil Gallagher, Nazi-like Gallagher out of Miami, she pays cash for her new yachts.
Mm.
So you're creating kids that are going to be trauma-based situations that are going to be medicalized. And so you have the financial predators and the sexual predators. that are all targeting these kids. You all also have other dark special interests, but that is what
Yeah.
that's what the trans movement is all about. And so parents and lawmakers need to understand, unless we understand, and here's two other facets, by the way, the same people that are pushing this stuff are the same perps and perp apologists that want men in women's prisons and men in women's private
Right.
spaces. The reason they want on sports teams is not for the medals. They get to access what? Before and after. They access the locker rooms and showers. Look at what Riley Gaines and her teammates were subjected to. And they take their
Yeah.
cell phones in, they're taking photographs and videos and
Hmm.
uploading them on the dark web. This is a predator. The trans movement is a financial and sexual predator's dream come true, all at the expense of these kids.
Hey, I want to go. You mentioned furries, and I want to ask you a few more questions about that because I know there was a particular very small county school system where they had this sort of this epidemic of furries for a little while, and I mean it was pretty bad. And one of the state legislators spoke out about it, and then all of a sudden she was criticized. So,
Oh, yeah.
so let's spend a little bit of time because these kids in the school and what's seeping into the schools and all of this very aberrant behavior. What do you know about, and where did this furries thing even come from?
There we go. Furries originated out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Has close ties to, apparently. I interviewed the guy that wrote the book on it. I wrote the foreword. Okay. Apparently close ties to organized crime as well in its origins. Okay. So what is a furry? I had never heard of a furry until conducting sex offender treatment in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Doing a specialized evaluation, a guy was going to be getting out, but it was clear this guy was still as deviant as all get out. He graduated from somebody else's group. Okay. So I'm doing a parole psych eval, but because he was a sexually violent predator, I'm doing his eval. And it was clear to me the guy had been faking it. The term "fake it to make it." So we have an unregenerate, unchanged, just more sophisticated pedophile. He's going out. Okay, so I thought, well, I might as well pump him for information. So he's a sexual psychopath, and so you play to their ego. So
Hmm.
that's why a 3-hour interview. If I'm an academic, I spent 8 years with Geneva College, so I understand academics. I was an adjunct prof. But if your full-time job is an academic and you're an academic researcher that is a sexologist and you're going to get definitive information from pedophiles, what, you're going to do the lengthy process to be able to interview them for 3 hours, and you think you're getting firsthand data that can be, that your methodology is reliable, and you've just been played because you don't know they practiced on you for parole, and they want you to come up with certain findings so that you influence public opinion, public policy, legislation, and judicial decisions and sentence structures. You've been played. And therefore, now we all believe, well, pedophiles somehow, they must have been hurt people, and they are attracted to kids at the same age they themselves are perpetrated upon, and it's a lie.
Mm.
How do we come to find that out? Well, researchers researching what? Well, sex offenders. Okay, where they have access to them? 3 hours sitting down. 3 hours. I had years. So this is the danger of this. Ask the question again, Connie. My apologies. Gosh, I'm so passionate.
Well, well, I just saw, and as we are watching we're
Furries.
watching schools and kids, and we
There we go.
want to, and what's happening with the law, and what's with the furries?
Okay, so here's the furries in a nutshell. Furries are big costume, mascot-like costumes. So you see a sporting event, you've got the mascot. You go to Disneyland and you've got the characters.
Right.
That's what a furry is. Okay, it's a costume. So you have a group. They call it a fandom. So you have this loosely associated group, just like Trekkies. Okay, we have people that are in Star Trek or Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people that are really into it, what do they end up doing? Well, their whole world revolves around this, and eventually those that are into it the most, and adults, it's almost like delayed adolescence, right? What do they do? Well, they buy suits. And the Star Wars guys you got adult men that are dressing as stormtroopers. Well, where do they go? They eventually get together in conferences. And where are those? Those are big hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So descending upon a hotel are a bunch of stormtroopers, and they play in their stunted adolescence instead of helping shut-ins or whatnot fix their homes and stuff. True volunteer work. We've got these very myopic, but okay. So we got a bunch of people that are into Star Trek or into okay. Now picture people wearing animal costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And by their own research, which, okay, what kind of furry research do we have? But even if you have Furpedia, Wicca Furpedia, there's a thing out there called Wicca Furpedia. Okay. Well, if deviants are going to be doing research on deviants, it's going to be biased anyways. Whatever findings you have, it's going to be dumbed down. It's like if you research how many men are into pornography, not every man is going to admit. So whatever number you get, you can increase the reality of it. So 90% of all men access porn. Well, guess what? You're talking about 98% because the people that you were interviewing weren't quite sure if you're going to share that information or identify a husband.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just the reality of it.
Right.
Okay, so we've got furries. And they ask, what kind of pornography do the furries access? 98% of the men admitted that they access, quote unquote, anthropomorphic porn. Okay, let me tell you what that is. Bestiality. And they have reframed bestiality. Now we have a new term for it called zoophilia.
Right.
Well, what is zoophilia or a zoophile or a zoo? Okay, what is that? Bestiality. Well, how do you get bestiality? Now think about this. I'm not going to fault Disney, but maybe we should. We've got the Fox and the Hound. We've got, think about how many animated Disney films have animals like Robin Hood, I forget, right? Where the characters are all the animals. But then eventually the animals will fall in love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm trying to remember a lot of the different ones. The Fox
Right.
and the Hound,
Lady and the
Lady and the Tramp. There we go. Okay, and they're in Paris, and remember they're both sucking on the same little strand of spaghetti, and
right.
kiss, and it's all cute, and right. Okay. Now, what might a deviant man do? And you just nailed it, right? With Tangled. Well, let's say with animals. Well, what could be more harmless? So we're online. We're going to start drawing, and online. Do you know who your kid's interacting with? No, it's just they're interacting with a friend, and they're drawing little pictures. And before you know it, what kind of character do you identify with? Well, I think I'm kind of sly, so I like the fox, or I'm aggressive. I'm a bear, or I'm a leopard, and so maybe we're going to draw ourselves, and before you know it, we're a boy, and then we're morphing into my favorite animal, and so before you know it, or a girl, Cheetah the cat. Okay, well, Cheetah falls in love with who? Oh, another. And so in the furry fandom, what you're going to see is there is an overlap online. And you have a lot of cross between human characteristics, body shapes, with breasts, with exaggerated breasts,
right,
and animals. And what do you find? Do you think a deviant guy can create pornography where a female teen girl that looks like a cheetah is being gang raped by a bunch of cheetah guys with genitalia?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's on the animated end. And then it's under the auspices of furries. So while a kid is being groomed online by perpetrators with anthropomorphic stuff, they're understanding the idea of furries. All somebody has to do is Google, or forget Google, but Bing or whatever. Here it is: deviant furry art. And you tell me. So now at these conferences, a perpetrator can actually hide. So a perpetrator gets one of these suits and puts on a hood. And what they said is this: Ms. Julie, it's unbelievable. Parents will protect their kids everywhere else, stranger danger, but you put on a costume and a hood. So who's in that?
True. Yeah.
And they will hand their kids to us. Because
absolutely.
Most people think, this is an interesting thing. Most people think this without even thinking it. Here's a psychological barrier that people have to kind of tap into for themselves. Well, okay, John, I know these deviant guys are heinous and all that, but without knowing it, this is what most adults think, that there's a certain line beyond which, oh, come on, even the most deviant of sex offenders, they would never stoop so low as to put on women's underwear or put on a furry. Come on, certainly, even they have more. Okay. It's
Yeah.
all gaining access to kids. They will do whatever they need to do, whatever they can do, whatever's in their strategic best interest. Do you really think a sex offender is beyond dressing in drag, is beyond dressing in women's underwear, is beyond putting on a female swimsuit and joining a female team? Do you really think a sexual predator wouldn't become a teacher, wouldn't start using furries, wouldn't start using LGBT ultimately to push the P in pedophilia? Do you really think there's a line beyond which a sexual predator wouldn't go? Or do you think it's all chess to them and pragmatic?
Well, and this issue with people dressed up in these furries or costumes, any type of costume, there's a sense of enchantment for children,
Yeah.
right? When you have a child who's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, there is that sense of enchantment if they see Mickey Mouse dressed up, or if they see a big bear or a big mascot or something, and parents encourage it, right? Like, oh, go look, oh, there's Mickey, oh, I mean, it's just bringing this in. So these teenagers that are bringing uh, this furry, whatever you call it,
Persona,
this fantasy,
right? They call them personas.
this persona into these schools. Where's that coming in from them? Are they getting that from social media,
Right,
from TikTok, from?
they're getting it online, but typically what you're going to find is then there's more than like an LGBTQ after school safe space club.
Ah,
So where do the two meet, so to speak? Why? Okay, LGBTQ stuff and furries. What do they think about? Who's pushing it? Financial or sexual predators.
mm-hmm,
They'll take any tack, any avenue to begin to groom. What is grooming? I'm just working you little by little because
mm-hmm.
I know what I want. You don't know what I want. Now it's just how am I going to get what I want? The smarter I am, the more I'm going to the more I know the first thing I have to do is groom the parents into believing I'm a nice guy. Why? Because then they're
Right.
going to trust me. Trust me. Why? Because then they're going to give the kid to me either as a youth pastor, a Boy Scout leader, or an LGBTQ safe space person. Because now in their mind, but he looks like such a nice guy. He would never, and that's all I need from you.
So they distort reality.
There you go. And so I'm
Yeah.
grooming. I first have to test the awareness, the insight, and the degree of resolve of the adults. And all I
Mm-hmm.
need to see now is flags. What color flags? The trans and the rainbow flag. Because I know that you're not going to believe what's right in front of your face. Because I'm going to take grooming material and I'm going to hand it to a kid, and you think it's wonderful because now I'm helping affirm a child.
Right.
You're my most useful idiot, and I love you. And that's why I
Right.
smile.
Well,
Because
and
you'll reframe all my actions. It'll
mm-hmm.
be, well, I know what it looks like, but it's not that.
So the parents' responsibility in this, and in Tennessee and Kentucky last year, they passed laws outlawing gender transition hormones for minors, and they did it in Kentucky. And those two laws were challenged in court, and were challenged in the Sixth Circuit Court, which would be our federal circuit, which would be Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And the law was upheld, but because the theory was that the government still has a right to rule or to create a law on what they consider dangerous for a child, whether it's smoking or alcohol or gender affirming hormones.
Okay.
On the other side, though, so there's three judges that sit on a panel, and the third judge wrote a very, very, very strong dissenting opinion on parental rights. And when this opinion came out, I started talking immediately about it because I knew there was going to be this very strong argument between parental rights and the government controlling treatment. So step back now and talk about parents of children who are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old who now say they are somehow they're transitioning their gender. I can't even imagine at that age that they could even think that as a child. So what is happening there?
You got one of about three issues. One is you either have a gravely naive parent who's being influenced. So you're a predator's best friend. You're a financial predator's best friend or a sexual predator's best friend because you can't see how I'm using your I'm manipulating you. If I'm a surgeon who wants money, but it's also you've got a number of special interests, meaning who would benefit from taking a boy and confusing them and the parents and eventually, quote unquote, turning them into a girl, which you don't. By the way, you can't create a vagina in a boy. All you create forever is an open wound. That's why on Jazz Jennings, there's a now pretty famous clip of the mother. Jazz is what? Jazz is college age now. So we have this weird family enmeshment, highly dysfunctional, highly toxic. And the mother has this applicator. It's really something to keep the wound open. So for a boy, the boy's going to have his penis and testicles eradicated. So we're castrating a kid, and then we're drilling a hole into this kid as a vagina. Okay, forget this bottom surgery crap. We need to be precise. So for
Right.
boys, what they call bottom surgery is castration, and now we're drilling a fake vagina, either using, we're going to take the skin of the penis and invert it, or we're going to take part of their colon or part of their GI tract. Oh, that's wonderful. For what? Because these kids by that time are what? They're gender confused. So they're already, and inevitably you're going to hear this, by the way. I've listened to hundreds of these stories of the detransitioners, the kids that have come out of this, the young adults, like Chloe Cole and others that are suing, and Kaiser Permanente, and helping to speak to lawmakers. And without exception, what you will hear is the kids will say this: well, I knew I was bisexual by the age of 10. Okay. Again, think about a mandated reporter, what they should be able to identify. No kid left to themselves, just leave them alone, let kids be kids. And you will find that a kid will never have a sexualized thought until natural hormones kick in. That's at about
Right.
adolescence.
Right.
Okay. That's when you start to notice, instead of boys and girls just playing with each other, all of a sudden for the first time now, it's like, oh, I'm starting to notice something. And the very first ones, boys or girls, they feel a little awkward because nobody else in their peer group views the other opposite sex as kind of attractive. So we all know about the awkwardness of adolescence. When you take a kid and you hear that long before the natural change, through hormones, puberty, if they had sexualized thoughts, that has to come from the outside. That means somebody's been influencing them. That's just being aware of sexuality. If you then have a kid talk about, well, I knew I was sexually active, or how about this? I knew I was bisexual. Now you're taking normal sexuality, you're introducing that, you're creating it much more hyper to where they would talk about, I knew I was sexually, right? If you say, I knew I was a bisexual, that presupposes they're already somehow engaged in something. And so the question is, who's engaging the kid? Well, somebody of their same gender. They're being perped on. So all these kids, without exception, all the detransitioners will say, I knew I was bisexual by the age of 10. So what you're telling me is that virtually 100% of the kids that are being sucked into the trans movement are sexual abuse survivors. They've been groomed. So you're taking a vulnerable population who doesn't have intuition now, and they're susceptible to being manipulated. And you can have a financial psychopath. We call them predators. We call Bernie Madoff with everybody's money. So you're setting them up to be easily manipulated. So if you have a mother who's going along with this, either she herself is a sexual abuse survivor and has no intuition. So either she's just going along with it and not questioning, where's this
Right.
coming from within my kid? She has all the indicators that somebody's grooming her kid. That would be the first aspect. That's the least offensive to me. We just need to get through to that parent that, wait a second, your kid, these are all the red flags that your kid's being groomed or perped on by somebody. The kid is being unduly influenced. Don't do this. You need to protect your child. Okay, that's the least of those. The next is you have a very personality disordered parent, likely a narcissist, who's trying to get attention at the kid's behest. So the kid really doesn't want to do this. The
Mhm.
mother is now pressuring her. Jazz Jennings, mother. Okay, it's very classic. The majority of what's going on for those kids that are being transitioned early, you have, it's either the schools and the parents don't know what to do. So somebody's unduly influencing. The parents now are just like, I don't know, I don't want to get in trouble, and maybe this is true. So they're really ignorant. Okay, that would be one population. The other is the parent that has the personality disorder. So it's usually the mother, okay, who's
Mm.
severely narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, that's the kind that, like Jazz Jennings' mother, that if Jazz stops, Jazz is college age. If Jazz stops dilating, meaning shoving that applicator up to keep the wound open, I'll do it myself.
Mm.
Let that sink in. Talk about emotional incest at best. At worst,
Wow.
I think there's very dark stuff that's happened to that kid. There's a couple of series, a couple of the episodes that really should raise eyebrows. And then the last option, and this is very significant as well, is you have child trafficking going on. For every sophisticated male perpetrator, think Epstein, think Keith Raniere of NXIVM, inevitably you're going to find a female. So with Keith Raniere of NXIVM, you had Allison Mack. Jeffrey Epstein had who? Ghislaine Maxwell. You're
Mhm.
going to find a female involved, especially you're going to find them in the foster care end of things. But so they're facilitating it. So you can have some situations, just like you have some mothers that pimp out their kids for drugs or cash. You can have a
Mhm.
situation that a mother's allowing this to happen. Why? Because now look over here, my kid's transitioning. Meanwhile, the kid's being pimped out.
Wow. Yeah, this whole issue with the personality disorder with a parent, especially a mom, getting involved in this is
Yeah,
wretched.
they're using their kid for their own
Wretched.
devices. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we been chatting about an hour and a half. As I said before we started, I think we could do a marathon
Yeah.
probably of about 8 hours and keep intertwining these two issues because they're so important. And I want people's eyes to be wide open. I want them to see everything around them. This issue that you talked about earlier, again, I've seen kids and had domestic cases and divorces where there have been allegations and false allegations and all kinds of confusion about whether or not there is sexual abuse of a young child. And this comment that you made earlier about a, a very small child saying, "I hate being a girl. I wish I was a boy," and or if they say anything at all, right? Because it's so hard.
Connie,
So we.
let me connect one additional dot. People need to understand this. And it's happening in Canada, it's happening in the Netherlands. And I knew it was going to happen. I did some writing about it and spoke to those earlier, a couple of years ago. Okay. Think about both in socialized countries, it makes sense that it's going to happen because there's limited dollars, limited healthcare dollars. And so every country that has socialized medicine, eventually what you're going to find is this, right? Because eventually you have less producers, more consumers, just by virtue of all those countries are going to produce less babies. It happens automatically, right? So you remove sexuality from any idea of commitment, and there goes the nuclear family. So inevitably, in every socialized country, it's only a matter of time till you have a graying of the population, you have a decreasing birth rate. The only way they can maintain their own country's population is immigration. But within the country itself, babies are not being produced. So Planned Parenthood is a eugenics dream come true. But every socialized every country with socialized medicine eventually will have to do this. They're going to have to cut costs. You just have to. Okay. What's one way? And healthcare is what? It's a major drain on a budget, especially for a socialized society, because you don't have producers. So eventually you're just having less and less income coming in. So you're going to have to find a way of sloughing off unnecessary expenses. Cradle to the grave, you just bring both ends of the continuum of the bell-shaped curve in. So, which means if you can off people earlier or later, sooner, then you're right. Another way to put it: if I can allow older folks to be off the dole, off the rolls, then we've saved money. Or all I need is a good pandemic. And now, how much does it cost for elder care? But if I can suddenly have 50% of my old folks who are in convalescent hospitals suddenly get COVID because I've mandated, like Rachel Levine, who was the health secretary of Pennsylvania, who was the one to put sick COVID elderly people, mandated the convalescent hospitals and care homes to take back to readmit those COVID positive older folks, while Rachel Levine got his own mother out. Rachel Levine committed mass murder. And now he's in charge of what? Pushing transgender medicine. There's a direct correlation here, because one way for a socialized for a country with socialized medicine to cut their costs down is, again, get people off the rolls. How do you do that? You kill them off, because it's cradle to the grave. So you just shorten you make each happen sooner. Well, but we have a dilemma then, because what happens in that weird stage where we have more teenagers or young adults? Man, they're costing a lot, especially if they're sexually active. Now they're costing, then maybe what we do, could we, if we're just looking at numbers, how do we stop the utilization? Because we created it. Now they're dependent upon what? Medication. We've pushed it. What kind of medication? Cross-sex hormones, and they're going to have to maintain this for the rest of their life. So we've created this bubble. It's like a housing bubble. So what do we do? Well, they know that once a kid goes through all these surgeries, now dependent upon the stuff for life, the kids are going to get depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so maybe we introduce the concept. Did Canada? Let's see. MAID, medical assistance in dying.
Yeah.
We now
gosh.
have,
Mm-hmm.
all we have to do as lawmakers, it's happening in the Netherlands and it's now happened in Canada. So lawmakers, you need to understand, those that are pushing the trans deception will also push for euthanasia, assisted dying for depression, mental health issues, and they're going to lower the age. Now you have offed those kids that are the primary users, because we're going to say this: it's compassionate. They are mature adults. They're able to have bodily autonomy, be overseeing their own health care. And here's the one group behind the scenes that is loving this. So you've helped make it less of a drain and therefore profitable. So you've cut the drain part out. But if I'm a sexual perpetrator, and if I've been sophisticated enough to ensure that my victims, plural, haven't said anything, because I've played with their mind, because after all, they still like me, they think I like them, right? So they're going to keep the secret, but they're going to get depressed. So they go into a psych hospital. It's the perfect silencing of the trans lambs, because a kid will take the secret to the grave. So if I'm a perpetrator, and perpetrators can run in networks, and oftentimes those networks will include more well-educated people, including medical professionals. So you can have child trafficking involving medical professionals that are involved in the decision-making. So if I'm a pedophile in a pedophile ring, and I have certain of my co-perps that are on medical staff, all I need is for one of my guys to help convince the kid to sign, and now the kid will be euthanized. And it happened within, a child was euthanized in Canada, and we have it on recording. If you go on to Unmasking the Trans Movement, we talk about the subject, and there's a TikTok video, an audio, it captures an audio. It was a phone call given by a mother, maybe to a radio station or to somebody, where she talks about parents that put their child into the hospital. Maybe the child had COVID, but within 24 hours. So the parents go back to see their kid. Within 48 hours, the child is dead. The hospital killed the kid because somebody talked the child into signing the MAID form, medical assistance in dying. The child was that was it. The child was depressed. So the mother takes the child to the hospital, age 12. And because it's legal, the hospital staff was able to facilitate the child signing it. And the parent, within 48 hours of admitting their depressed child, the child was dead. There's nothing that parents can do.
Well, and I'm gonna relate that back to the family rights bill that they just passed in Tennessee, and under they have a special medical section that they have set aside specifically, and it says under this medical section that a person is defined as give me one second here. Oh, an individual, a corporation, or any other legal or commercial entity, whether or not a citizen or domiciliary of this state, and whether or not organized under the laws of this state. And a person can now provide emergency, whatever emergency is, provide emergency care to a child under this law with no liability.
And a hospital is an organization, and I can make the case, if I'm an evil doctor or perpetrator,
Right.
that I talked this kid, and a kid would rather die than not have their breasts cut off. So guess what?
Right. Now it's an emergency. Wow. Oh my goodness. If I were writing a very dark movie script about some
This would be it.
futuristic world, this would be
This would
it.
be it.
This would be it. So now that we've shaken everybody to the core, I think we will wrap it up. But we certainly need to keep putting this message out there and keep bringing this back to kids. And what are parents going to do? So I'm going to say goodbye for now.
Okay, let
And
me quickly though, Connie. Here's
yep.
what a parent can do. Parents, help your kids understand basic biology. Stick with the
Mhm.
chromosomes, right? There's no middle sex thing. Intersex is very, very, very rare. Okay. The other is help a child understand, and parents need to know that the way you help a child's self-esteem, therapists need to know, everybody needs to know. It used to be common knowledge in the field, which is the way to help a child's self-esteem is to help them feel competent at something, feel good about themselves. So help them pursue their passions and interests, get them off of social media, get them involved in activities, help them feel good about something. There used to be a song by Billy Joel, "Don't Go Changing the Color of Your Hair." I'm not going to sing, right? But it used to be, "Don't go changing for me. I love you just the way you are." Now the message is, we have to eradicate you, your old dead self. We have to eradicate you to help you accept yourself.
Right.
You know, you accept yourself just the way you are. That's how you help a child's self-esteem, not teach them that they have to change and cut off body parts to go find themselves. And therefore,
Right.
they'll be pharmaceutical clients and patients and customers for life. That's not freedom.
Oh, it sure isn't. All right. Well, we're going to end the live stream. Hang on there just a minute. Don't hang up because I think we can still be connected. So, thank you, everybody, and we'll keep passing this around. This is such important information. And with the society that we're living in, the legal environment, the legislative environment, everybody needs to be heads up all the time. All right. See y'all later.